I'm Tootight Lautrec, the drag laureate of the Sonnetarium, and here we are once again in the Sonnetarium at the bottom of the down staircase in the permanently sequestered remainders section of an unnamed local library, which may or may not have a couple of lonely literary lions woefully watching on the front steps as the crowds disperse and traipse over trodden upon rice and wilted flowers as they walk away from the wedding that never occurred in Sonnet 116, while I drink my sour concoction of rotten tomatoes, which actually makes me feel quite a bit better. One must gather what joys one can, where one can. And since Sonnet 116 discusses the wedding that could never take place, I have jumped ahead to Sonnet 117, and one of the joys of this entire project is that as I read through them one by one, as they occur sort of in real time, I discover what I think as I think it, and I get a chance to rethink what I thought I thunk last week and to expand upon my understanding of what's happened so far. And this project has been a continuous education for me, and for those of you who are new, welcome, and for those of you who are old friends of the channel, well, thank you for showing up again and watching me as I think my way through the 1609 quarto version of all of Shakespeare's sonnets. So one thing that I learned in reading Sonnet 117 is how intimately connected it is to Sonnet 116. So we'll do a very quick overview of Sonnet 116, and I'll have a little sip of my rotten tomatoes, and we'll go through briefly a little bit about 116. I spoke last time about that 116 could be, that it functions on a couple of different levels. On the surface, and read in isolation from all the other sonnets, it appears to be a happy, happy, joy, joy poem about holy matrimony. And by holy, I mean sanctified by the church and by the society of the time, to wit, between a man and a woman, which is the only kind of marriage that could occur. On another level, and staying with heterosexuality for a moment, it's a more cynical description of an impossible kind of love that does not admit or allow to enter any kind of impediment. It's a paean to this pie in the high, high, high sky kind of love that's a little too high for any mere mortal to ever attain. It's hyperbolic, it's abstract, and it's an unreachable kind of love. But then, taken in context with all of the other sonnets that we've read, it describes love between two minds, which coincidentally happen to have two bodies attached to them. And of all the bodies that we've seen, except for in sonnets 40, 41, and 42, any body that's described is a male body. So this is a union with no hope, and no hope of sanction from anyone or any institution, which is quite sad. So if we harken back for a moment to Stephen Booth's wide admonition that one should never approach poetry as if it's a puzzle to be pieced together or a code to be cracked, then one might wonder what the heck is up with Tootight Lautrec, trying to always read subtext and double entendres into every sonnet that we encounter. And you might also ask, why would a poet write poems that work very well on a surface level, but also have other possible meanings? And I'd say consider this. Number one, playfulness. Poets use language that could be understood in more than one way because puns, double entendres, and things like that are entertaining. It's a writer's job to entertain, even if it also edifies at the same time. And we all know that entertainment can take the form of comedy or tragedy or any strong emotion. So if one only reads poems that only edify or only preach, that sustains this steady drone of one-note highfalutin moralizing, then that quickly becomes what one might call a drag. Secondly, if, say, oh, I don't know, one lived at a time or in a place where same-sex love must be hidden, where discovery of such a relationship might involve punishment in the form of either ostracism from family or friends, or perhaps even murder by a disgusted citizen or even by the state, then it may serve to play with language. And the playing with language not only serves the poetic purpose of play, but it also serves to add an extra titillation or fulfillment for those who might be in the know, or those who might recognize themselves in the codes, in what is said or what is hinted at or half said between the lines. So briefly, Sonnet 116 defines by negation, admits impediments, which means it either allows impediments to enter into the relationship or it confesses impediments. It talks about love doesn't alter or remove, and the question I have is, whose love is the narrator discussing? His or the beloved's that will alter or remove? There's mention of a wandering bark, a ship adrift on a sea, looking for love in all the wrong places. Hey, sailor. Time in this poem will kill us all. So let's set an impossible standard, which is that we will love to the edge of doom. You know, who can possibly? And then if this be error, and error, as I've said before, is the root word is errare, which means to wander. And if this be wandering, this wandering bark does sort of hark back to Sonnet 109, if I have ranged, and to 110's, alas, 'tis true, I have gone here and there. And then at the end, I never writ, nor no man never loved. If this be proved upon me, and it has been proved upon him in Sonnets 109 through 112. So the argument falls back on itself. Either he never did love me, or you never did love him, or we were never in a reciprocal love relationship. So the narrator's worry seems to be coming out here as desperate and sad and lonely, and you know, looking for he's the wandering bark looking for his North Star. So then we get to Sonnet 117, and let me read that first, and then I'll discuss it and how it may relate to Sonnet 116. Sonnet 117. Accuse me thus, that I have scanted all wherein I should your great deserts repay, forgot upon your dearest love to call, whereto all bonds do tie me day by day, that I have frequent been with unknown minds, and given to time your own dear purchased right, that I have hoisted sail to all the winds which should transport me farthest from your sight. Book both my wilfulness and errors down, and on just proof surmise accumulate. Bring me within the level of your frown, but shoot not at me with your wakened hate, since my appeal says I did strive to prove the constancy and virtue of your love. Okay, so the first quatrain, accuse me thus, seems to be an answer to 116. Let me not admit impediments? Okay, I've changed my mind. After you accuse me, I'll admit some impediments. I have scanted all wherein I should your great deserts repay. I've blown off the love that you've shown me, for which I should repay you equally. And I forgot to call upon your love, where all bonds do tie me day by day. You know, in Sonnet 116, we have alters when alteration finds and remover from remove. Here we have someone who can't be removed because all bonds tie me. I can't be removed. I'm almost imprisoned by your love. In the second quatrain, that I have frequent been with unknown minds. Now, these are not true minds. These are not married minds. These are unknown minds who seem to flitter and flut around me wherever I go. Not only that, I have hoisted sail to all the winds. Now, where in 116 we have this ever fixed mark, and the North Star, the love is the star to every wandering bark. We have someone who's sniffing around unknown minds and hoisting sail with all of the sexual innuendo intact in that image, hoisting sail. And yes, I've wandered here and there, and to all the winds. I've hoisted sail to all the winds, not just a few. In the third quatrain, book both my willfulness and errors down. Write it all down. Book it down. Write it all down and show me the proof. Except, oops, I may have already done that in the past, in the last few dozen sonnets, but okay, yeah, write it all down. And in Sonnet 116, where love is supposed to last until the edge of doom, it appears that the edge of doom is coming sooner than the narrator thinks. And love also in 116 bears it out to the edge of doom. It seems to be asking, can't you just bear it out? Show me the proof of my inconstancy, and actually the narrator has done that in all the sonnets before them. And then if you look at 116, the last two words of the couplet are almost the same as the last two words of the couplet in 117. 116, if this be error and upon me proved, I never writ, no nor man ever loved. So we've got proved and loved, where loved is a verb, and we have prove again, and love, except love here is a noun. But since my appeal says I did strive to prove the constancy and virtue of your love, and my appeal is Sonnet 116. So if Sonnet 110 says never say, Sonnet 117 says, okay, let me say it. And let me say it this way. Accuse me thus, I have scanted, accuse me thus, I have scanted, I forgot to call upon your love. I've been with unknown minds, and if those minds happen to have had bodies, well, what's a guy to do? I've hoisted sail, so write down everything about my willfulness and wanderings, add up all my faults, and frown upon me. Go ahead. But don't hate me. Don't hate me, because I may not have proved my love, but I've tried to prove it. I've actually tried to prove your love for me. The last line. Since my appeal says I did strive to prove the constancy and virtue of your love. So this is a very odd turn. It turns it back onto the beloved and seems to be saying, well, I've fooled around to see if you really loved me, which we've heard before. Not a tremendously persuasive argument when you're trying to convince someone that you love them, but gay men sometimes take what they can get, or since there are no rules to break. And this may be something that we might consider in this relationship. So Stephen Booth seems to think that the entire sonnet revolves around line 2, wherein I should your great deserts repay. Deserts meaning your deserving qualities, number 1. Number 2, desert as in abandonment. So who is deserting whom in this sonnet? Hard to say, but it seems like they do deserve one another. So, as we always do, we try to determine if there's any gender. And in fact, not explicitly, no. Now, but we think we know what's going on. Dramatically, I was thinking about this. If these two sonnets were exchanged with some two characters in a play, it would provide for a very dramatic moment. This Sonnet 116, these desperate protestations of love that are perhaps rebuffed between the 116 and 117. And then to be followed up with 117 with here's what I really think, here's what's really been going on. It seems to provide a really dramatic kind of moment. And the narrator still seems to be saying, I still can't quit you. And no matter what our problems are, can't we just work it out and stay together? Which in a way is sort of touching, in a way. Depending on how you look at it. Could be creepy, could be touching. I'm going for touching at this point. Now, narratively, last week I said that poems about same-sex attraction were radical. And it turns out I was wrong. My research so far has uncovered Christopher Marlowe's Hero and Leander, which was published in 1598. Remember, this came out in 1609. So this is published 11 years. Christopher Marlowe's Hero and Leander is 1598, 11 years before the Sonnets came out. And then Richard Barnfield's The Affectionate Shepherd in 1594 and Cynthia and Certain Sonnets in 1595 talk explicitly about a shepherd's attraction to a young male. And so male-male love is referred to in other poetic sequences. But actually, there were moral mumblings after Barnfield's The Affectionate Shepherd came out. And when he published Cynthia and Certain Sonnets, he wrote this to attempt to excuse himself. Some that did interpret the affectionate shepherd, otherwise than in truth I meant, touching the subject thereof, to wit, the love of a shepherd to a boy, a fault the which I will not excuse, because I never made. Only this I will unshadow my conceit, being nothing else but an imitation of Virgil in the second eclogue of Alexis. So he blames it all on Virgil, and then he goes on with Cynthia and Certain Sonnets. In those Certain Sonnets, he harks back to the same character that was in The Affectionate Shepherd and does the same exact thing. So one might wonder about the society in which these poems appeared and think that there were pockets where same-sex relationships occurred all throughout time and were tolerated by certain factions of society more than they were tolerated by other factions of society. So there were moral mumblings. Homophobia, it appears, is forever. And then also we have to remember that Shakespeare really, there's no evidence that he had any hand in the publication of this 1609 quarto, and maybe that was for a good reason. The other thing is that Virgil and Barnfield wrote sonnets or poetic sequences about the love of a man for another man, but it's an unrequited love. And Shakespeare's characters here are deeply involved, and there's nothing unrequited about it for a lot of these sonnets. In fact, it ends up being more like an epistolary novel where we only have one half of the correspondence, which is the narrators, and we don't have the beloved's correspondence. So, but it's clear that they are in a relationship. It is returned for periods of time anyway, and in that sense, I do think that it is radical. So, romantic sexual relationship with at least one other man and at least one other woman, because we have sonnets 40 to 42 and 127 to 154, which we'll get to later. And these sonnets that we've seen so far are introspective, tortured. They are not chivalric. They are not idealized love, and it's not unrequited love. It's very faulty, very human relationship, and I do think that that is groundbreaking. And I also think that it's wonderful. And that will have to be your vocabulary word for the day, wonder. Look it up. It's in the dictionary under W, but guess what? It's also everywhere you look. So pay attention to it, please. Until we meet again, I am Tootight Lautrec. Mwah. Not so bad. Rotten tomatoes.